Hi, I'd like to welcome you to our video series on managing work-related stress, and I will be focusing on the line manager, how they can more effectively deal with this risk in their teams. This is part 3 of that series. I hope you've watched parts 1 and 2 already, and if not, please check them out first. I would also recommend you take a look at our other videos on the organisational approach to managing work-related stress and understanding fatigue and burnout. In part 1, we looked at adopting a better approach to health and then the business case for managing work-related stress. In part 2, we considered the difference between work-related stress and pressure, when it changes from one to the other, and we also looked at what the HSE management standards are. Now, in part 3, we're going to look at what your role is as a line manager, the importance of your role and the positive impact that you can have. And also we'll look at some further information and resources that are available for you to use, which will help you in your role as a line manager. The first thing I want to note in this particular video is to say that you're not alone in trying to deal with this issue. Obviously, the focus in this video is on your role as a line manager, but the responsibility for effectively dealing with the issue falls to everyone, including the wider organisation and the employee. The Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, which in GB is the equivalent of the Labour Relations Agency here in Northern Ireland, have developed a framework for positive mental health at work. And basically it states that positive well-being and productive workplaces is a shared goal. The framework explains how the employers need to be physically committed to positive mental health. If they're not providing the leadership and the resources and the framework there for you as a line manager to carry out your role, it's going to be very difficult for you to manage work-related stress in your teams. They need to risk assess. They need to be engaging in this and not simply delegate all the responsibility to the line managers and the individuals themselves. So the individuals coming to them, they need to be more self-aware of what's going on with them. They need to be able to ask for help when needed. And of course, they need to feel like the environment is there for them to do that. And they need to be confident in that environment. But as a manager, you play a crucial role in the process as well, because you're right there at the coalface and will therefore be in a position to identify issues more quickly and be more aware of the day-to-day practicalities in your work area and what is reasonably practicable in terms of solutions. It's important that you as a line manager are informed about the organisational policies and the procedures and what resources are available, about what's going on with your team as well, but also, and this is very important, that you're open to conversations with your staff. So this really is a shared goal. It's not all about you, and it's not all on you either. Every person within the organisation and the structures and the policies and the procedures, they all need to work together to bring about this goal. So to start with, we have come up with an acronym that might help you remember some of the characteristics you should display as a line manager. These should hopefully be obvious points to make, really. You should always be fair and consistent. You should be able to identify the signs and symptoms of stress, and we looked at those in part 2, so do look out for them, and if they appear to be manifesting in a member of staff, then think about starting a conversation around work-related stress and the possible issues. You then have to manage and control those risks within your team, and of course part of that will be within the larger framework of the organisation and what resources you have at your disposal to help you do that. Allocate time for appropriate interventions for the individual, and we will look at interventions later in this video. Be aware of the support available within your organisation. Again, it's important that your employer not only creates an environment that looks for open communication, but actually provides the leadership in putting in place measures to more effectively manage it. So again, it's not all about you. You also need to lead by example. Be open to communication. Be aware of the signs and symptoms within yourself. Look after yourself and utilise the resources that are available for helping manage work-related stress for you. And so you're really demonstrating to the other members of your team how to go about doing that, and also that you're empathetic and want to help. Encourage the individual as well to fully participate in the risk assessment process. We identified in part 1 how this is an issue that's very individual in nature, and if the employee doesn't engage with the process, doesn't open up, doesn't tell you what the issues are, then it's going to be very difficult for you to manage that situation, and in fact almost impossible to put in place the right control mechanisms, because you won't know what issues are needing controlled and what the problems specifically are. So hopefully that is very aimable for you. But what about the employee? Well, we have an acronym for them too. They need to adhere to company policies and procedures. These things are not just there for the sake of it. They need to be followed. It is important for them to familiarise themselves with the HSE management standards. This will help them to better communicate in a more structured way where the issues are and what the issues are. While you have to encourage them, they themselves are responsible to actively participate in the process. Now, it's not always the case that someone else will notice the signs and symptoms. When we went through them, there were some that were very much to do with internal feelings and internal physiological effects going on. So the employee needs to be able to identify personal stressors too, and when that's impacting them, and recognising those signs and symptoms. Now, I should point out, this can be difficult to do for an individual, specifically because of those symptoms. They should read all communications. In all of this process, communication is central and a very critical aspect of it. They also, as an individual, should take notice of what's going on around them, maybe supporting their colleagues as well where it's needed, and also to know what support is available to all. They should engage with you as their line manager. And that can sometimes be difficult, and so it's important in your team to build up that level of trust and confidence in you and in your role as their line manager, so that all of your members of staff feel that they're able to engage with you. If training is available, then they need to avail of it. When we come to the interventions, you'll see that training is an important tool to utilise, and staff really should grab hold of that and make the most of it. You should have a sickness absence policy and a stress policy, by the way, and employees need to maintain contact with your employer during any period of absence as outlined in the policy. So putting all that together, as colleagues, hopefully following this, we can help create a fair team. A couple of scenarios now to think about, and the first one is that your member of staff is making them mistakes in work. They're a good worker normally, but they're starting to make a few more mistakes. They're complaining of headaches, and they recently were taking a lot of time off due to stress. Now, you know that their mother is very ill at the moment. The question really is, do you have to do anything about stress outside of work? There are 4 possible responses to this. Yes, you're required to do something, but you're not going to do it. You are legally required to do something, and you will. You don't have to do anything, and you're not going to do it. And no, you don't have to do anything, but you are going to try and do something to help the person. Okay, so which of these 4 would we go for? Well, firstly, to make it clear that employers are only responsible for stress arising from work activities, and so legally you don't have to do anything. So that rules out the first 2. However, when we think about the business case and we think of the moral perspective and the financial side of it as well, it's considered best practice for an organisation to help the individual. For the individual, whether the stress is manifesting inside work or outside work, it doesn't matter so much because it's still occurring and it's causing that impact upon them and their health. And if they go off as a result of stress, whether inside or outside of work, the organisation and your team will still have many of those costs associated with work-related stress and the absence that flows or the presenteeism. Remember, we talked about that. So it's beneficial for you as doing your role and your team and your employer as well, to try and help the individual, and ultimately it's of benefit to the individual. So think about what you can do in whatever way you can help out in work to help them get through this period of time. Advise your employee to visit their GP. Again, as stated in a previous time, most of us are not doctors, and we shouldn't be attempting to diagnose any issues. That really is there for the GP to do. So it's important for the GP to be involved in the process of trying to assess what's going on. You can review their workload and type of work, and if there are any temporary measures that can be put in place that will help them through this period of time. This might include more flexible working. In this particular example, the mother's very ill, so maybe they're having to take her to appointments or deal with things at home. Whatever the situation is, it's really just impacting them, their normal working pattern and the type of work maybe that they're doing. When they come out the other side of whatever the situation is causing the stress, they'll really value the effort you put in and what you did at the time. Finally, encourage employees to talk to their colleagues if they feel comfortable doing that. Remember, colleagues hopefully can be an important source of support for the individual. In the second scenario, a member of staff has presented with work-related stress. What do you have to do? Well, the first thing we would say is, what does the organisational policy state? All organisations should have a stress policy in place. And we ask our inspectors to raise that question when they're out doing their inspections. Do you have a stress policy in place? The policy should outline the steps you have to take as a line manager. Who is responsible for what? Is there such a thing as a stress questionnaire or referral to occupational health? Or what sort of early interventions are possible? What's very important in all of this is to identify actually, is it work-related stress, or are there issues going on outside of work causing stress that are then manifesting in work? And this will have an impact on how you might proceed. Tying in with the policy, you need to allocate responsibility to the right person. Perhaps it's not you as the line manager who should be dealing with the situation, and so depending on how the structures are set up in your organisation, make sure the right person has ownership of the case. If you are trying to assess the issues and what might be the most effective control measures, then carry out the risk assessment process, which we're going to cover in the next slide. And when you identify what these are, put in place the interventions. It's important to remember that this isn't simply about identifying what the issues are. It's about doing that so we can prevent them, so we can put in place the control measures to stop them occurring or to minimise their impact. Okay, so now let's consider the individual risk assessment process, and we are going to use the standard 5 steps to risk assessment approach. The risk factors mentioned in step 1 have already been identified, and they are the management standards: demands, control, support, relationships, role and change. And we looked at each of those areas in more detail in part 2. This is really just trying to drill down layer by layer in a structured way to get to the root causes. You need to speak to your member of staff, so start the session in a way that will create an atmosphere where they will feel comfortable opening up about what the issues are. You need to be able to listen well, to empathise with them and to show them that you care. You know, there will be a lot going on in their minds, so don't overload them or bombard them with lots of questions or approach it in a very stern management style. Do try and ask questions in a conversational manner and make sure it doesn't feel like you're just doing a tick box exercise. You know, this is very personal to them and you want them to feel comfortable opening up to you and explaining what the situations are and what's going on and what's wrong. Ultimately, the goal is to prevent work-related stress from occurring. So the problem assessment in step 2 needs to identify the core issues that are causing the person to suffer. And this is achieved by working through the different areas of the management standards and asking questions within each of those areas. We will look in a second at some resources that will help you with that. And don't forget, you do need to establish whether it's work-related stress or outside of work factors. But remember what we said earlier? If it is something outside of work, it is still of benefit to try and identify if there are any reasonable adjustments that can be made on a temporary basis to help the individual. You need to set some goals, some outcomes to work towards, which is really step 3 of the process. What is the preferred resolution for the employee? And, is that reasonable or not? If it isn't, this must be pointed out and an alternative sought. This is usually the part of the individual risk assessment process where it can break down. It is not a wish list. It must be reasonably practicable. But do explore and be open to all potential options. And then step 4, action planning. You need to formulate a plan. I think, if you consider short-term targets and long-term targets, some things may take a while to work through or to get implemented. So it's important that there are some quick hits that you can get with the individual, and they can see clearly that there's a difference being made. And this will encourage them through the rest of the process and the longer term changes. What external support is available that you can direct them towards? What about internal support as well? Think about all those resources and what's maybe outlined in your policy in the organisation. Maybe you have an occupational health service. Do they need to see their GP? Remember, we talked as well about the important role colleagues can play in terms of the support you can get from them. Do they need training that would be of benefit? And what about the adjustments as well that they may have suggested? It's not as simple as identifying the issues and then you telling them what the solutions are. They are best placed to suggest many of the solutions that will help them. And of course, with these action points, make sure that they are SMART objectives. That is to say that they are specific, measurable, achievable and agreed with the individual, realistic and relevant and time-bound. The final step of any risk assessment is to recognise that it is a living document. It's not done once and that's it. You have to monitor the progress. You'll have to carry out periodic reviews and see if the measures are actually being effective and working. So do set regular review dates and make changes when they are needed and sign it off when complete. Starting with a blank page when trying to do this, it can be daunting, and we have a number of resources to help you along the way. In this document, which is available on our website, the Workplace Mental Wellbeing at Work Risk Assessment and Action Plan. It's a simple document, but it gives you a framework to go through that whole risk assessment process. You can note down who's doing it, who it's for, and review dates. There is some information on SMART objectives, what the management standards are, and as you see here, for each of the management standards, there are suggested questions that you can go through with the individual to try and help identify the core issues and what you can do about it. Finally, there are examples as well on common issues that may come up and possible interventions depending on the issue that has been identified. Just a word about interventions. There are 3 categories of intervention we would look at. The first one being primary interventions. These are seeking to prevent the risk occurring in the first instance and cover things such as flexible working arrangements, more breaks, and support mechanisms, such as a buddy or a mentor system. Secondary interventions mainly revolve around things like training. So you might have time management training or assertiveness training or resilience training, various things like that. They're not preventing the issues, but they're providing the individual with the skills to deal with them in a better way so they don't become a problem. And finally, there's tertiary interventions. This is when the person has been affected by the issues and you're trying to help them get back to work and help them overcome the effects it's had on them. They can be things such as employee assistance programs or a welfare service or even external assistance providers that you can signpost them to. Really, what we would say is you need a blended approach in terms of the interventions put in place with a focus on the primary interventions. I just want to come back to review. It's so important to refer back, to that risk assessment log that you created. You need to look at the progress to date and make sure that what you've discussed, what has been changed, is actually working. And then agree what will happen next. Another thing just to note, even though we would say discuss it with them in an informal way, it is a formal process, so do record all your actions and conversations. Just by way of summary, what can you do as a line manager? Know the procedures, make sure there's early intervention, develop good management practices, involve HR, that's one of their functions to help you out in these situations, and occupational health, again, if your organisation has that in place. Do the individual risk assessment. Identify what the issues are and training. Do you need training as a manager to help you have a better skill set for dealing with these issues, or just training for your member of staff? Think about developing a wellness action plan and signposting to other sources of support. It's very important that we all recognise, by the way, that there are many organisations out there who want to help with various issues that there might be, and it's important to utilise those other sources of support. Make reasonable adjustments where possible, things like a buddy system or if someone has been off from work. Think about phased return and the right to request flexible working even. Again, a lot of the time these are often temporary. And so we might be looking at something maybe outside of work, it's not work related, but you're just helping the individual through issues happening outside of work. The last 2 points are so important. You need to have a sensitive approach with individuals. This is a difficult time for them, and confidentiality, shouldn't have to say this, but it is always essential. We've talked a lot about what you can do, but here are some things you shouldn't. What you shouldn't do is wait until someone is on long-term sick leave before taking action. So early intervention is vital. Remember, it is better to try and keep a person in work, and getting them back to work after a period of absence, sickness absence, can be more of a challenge for the individual as time goes by. If you remember back to part 1 when we went through the business case, if a person is off sick as a result of work-related stress, the average duration is 21.6 working days. And you think about that, that's over a month off work, out of your team. So you really want to have early intervention. Don't make assumptions, and it's so easy to do. Every case, every person is very much individual, and so you should never assume. It must be discussed with them, and they can explain to you what is actually the case. This seems like an obvious point, but don't say colleagues are under pressure at work or work is piling up. That may be the case, but an individual who is off is already under a lot of pressure themselves and not feeling good about that. This is not going to help them get back to work, and it's not going to help them relieve the pressure that's already on them. And finally, don't forget, this is very much individual, and recovery times for the same condition can vary from person to person, just as what triggers the person can vary. Coming on to the resources we have available for you. We've already mentioned earlier the action plan template. We also have these cards, and we call them the prompt cards, and they're available on our website. They're based around the 6 management standards, and really what they are is helping you to not have to sit there with a blank page with regards to what you can do. So for each of the areas, possible solutions to some of the common issues that crop up are provided. They may not work for your specific situation, but they are solutions that often do and are a helpful guide, very worthwhile considering, and it gives you a starter for 10. We also produced the Talking Toolkit, which is similar to the action plan template in that it outlines what the management standards are, what your role is as a line manager, and provides templates for you to use under each of the management standards and suggested questions, so you can have that conversation, note down what the responses are and what control measures were discussed with the individual. There's also the Mental Wellbeing at Work when Working at Home leaflet. One of the major changes in the last couple of years is the increase in working from home, and this has created a very different working environment for many employees. The leaflet points out some of the changes this brings about. For example, in an office environment as a line manager, you may be in the same office as the person, or just down the corridor, or in an open plan office, and you would have many opportunities on a daily basis to interact with them. Thinking about watching out for the signs and symptoms, you're able to see the person every day and pick up on them, but working from home is very different. Contact with the person will be much reduced, and so the leaflet highlights a number of things just to be aware of for you as the manager, also for the employee as well, so it's a very worthwhile leaflet to have a look at. There's also the Stress Management Competency Indicator tool. This tool is designed to allow you to assess whether the behaviours identified as effective for preventing and reducing stress at work are part of your management repertoire. The aim is really to help you reflect on your own behaviour and management style. It is available in an automated version and a paper version as well. It assesses you in 4 different areas, namely managing emotions and having integrity, managing and communicating existing and future work, managing the individual within the team, and managing difficult situations. I would just say it is for your own self-reflection and improvement. In terms of mental health services, there are a couple of useful resources for you. There's the Here to Help app, and you can see in the infographic all the details about it. It can be downloaded from the various app stores. The app was developed with support from Mid and East Antrim Council as a local initiative from people who wanted to make the range of services and support available to anyone in crisis. The aim of the app really is to provide quick access to find helplines for users to get support instantly, and also just a wide range of links to reading materials that can help people in a time of need. It's really a pocket guide that you may be able to get some information and direction if you're worried about someone or if you're feeling the pressure of life. It actually contains a lot of information from mindingyourhead.info, which was developed by the Public Health Agency. Also, from the Public Health Agency are what's known as the Z cards, and you see there are links for each of the 5 trusts, and again these are like an A to Z of all the various mental health services across different topics such as bereavement or abuse or family issues or urgent help, and it gives you the breakdown of what's available in that trust area and the contact details. We ourselves have a lot of useful resources on our website at www.hseni.gov.uk. The first link you see on the screen there, it takes you to the Mental Wellbeing at Work topic page where you can have a read and we go into more detail about the business case and what stress is and how to manage it more effectively, the management standards and all the other aspects that we've been discussing in this and the other videos that we're doing. And the second link brings you directly to the resource page, and that's a very great page to go to, and that's where we list all the various leaflets available to help your organisation, to help you as a line manager, and for the employee as well, all regarding work-related stress. The Talking Toolkit, the Working at Home leaflet, the prompt cards, and all the others I mentioned are all available for free there for you to download. So do go to that page, it's a good resource. That brings us to the end of this 3-part series on your role as a line manager. I want to thank you so much for watching this video series. I hope it's been of use to you. Please check out our other video series on the organisational approach and managing fatigue and burnout. And if you want to contact us for more information or help with anything we've been talking about in this video, then you can contact us via the email stress@hseni.gov.uk or by telephone on 0800 0320 121. Thanks again. Take care.